And we'll just give everybody maybe 3 more minutes, make sure we get most people logged on, and then we will get going tonight. All right. Looks like we have a pretty good group going. Might have a couple other folks trickle in, but I wanted to get started tonight. Thanks everybody for making the time to be here again. This is our 5th work group meeting. And everybody has the agenda, but I'm going to just pop it up on the screen real quick so everybody sees it again. Okay. And as everybody knows, we're going to be starting with a discussion on ZMOD, and we are very lucky tonight to have Carmen Bishop and Casey Judge here to start that discussion. They're going to give a brief overview on a couple of the things that you guys have brought up as concerns, and then we will get into question and answers. So hopefully we can make sure that any of the concerns or issues that you guys have brought up have the best answer that we can give. And it's coming straight from the folks who know it better than anybody else. So with that, I will turn it over to Casey and Carmen. Do you guys need to share screens?
That would be great. We just have a couple of slides if you don't mind, and I'll be sharing the screen.
Okay, I will pass it off to you then.
Thanks. Great. Yeah, seems to work better instead of us just talking at you. Everyone likes pictures, so we'll have a couple of visual aids with our slides. So thank you all for having us tonight. As Nicole mentioned, I'm Casey Judge, and I'm joined by Carmen Bishop. We're both the 2 lead project managers as on the agenda, or planners, working on the Zoning Ordinance Modernization, or ZMOD project. So Carmen and I have been working on this project for over 3 years now, about 3.5 years. So we've been out in the community doing lots of different outreach meetings. We've gotten a lot of great feedback, and we're happy to be here tonight to help answer any questions and hear the comments that you all would like to provide for us. So this presentation will be very brief. We're going to focus on the 2 topics that were raised: the accessory living units and the home-based businesses. And then we'll have time for question and answers on those topics, or if there's any other topics you wanted to discuss as a part of ZMOD, we are happy to speak to that as well. So first with the accessory living units, that is our new name for the current use of accessory dwelling units. We've given it a new name to distinguish it from another acronym in our zoning ordinance. We use ADUs in Fairfax County for affordable dwelling units. So our new acronym is ALU, a little bit different. So it is something in the current ordinance, like I mentioned, and an accessory living unit is a subordinate unit that contains the facilities for eating, sleeping, living, and sanitation. So we are bringing forward a variety of the current standards that are in our ordinance. And so the first and foremost, it's only permitted with a single family detached dwelling. So no townhouses, no multifamily units could avail themselves of this use. We would limit this to 2 bedrooms and 2 people, and that is a current standard today. We have brought forward the requirement that if you want a detached accessory living unit, the minimum lot size is 2 acres. And you would need the special permit with the Board of Zoning Appeals, so a public hearing in order to have a detached unit. We have brought forward the requirement that the owner must live on the property, so it must be owner occupied. It must be available for inspection by county personnel. And this does go without saying, but we're going to say it anyway. It does have to meet the applicable regulations for building safety, health, and sanitation. And we have gotten some great outreach from different community meetings. That we've added some standards for well and septic, as well as for fire safety. So we've added some standards that are in the short-term lodging provisions that require interconnected smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. So that's something new. Now, in terms of the proposed changes, we released this draft in our first draft in April. So we've been getting a lot of comments, and we've come a long way from that April draft. So we have proposed for an interior accessory living unit. So let's say it's in your basement, or if you want to do an addition to your principal dwelling, we have proposed an administrative approval process. That would be instead of the special permit process with the Board of Zoning Appeals. And staff support for that process is based on the objective nature of the standards. If you look at the standards, do you have 2 people? Yes or no? Do you have 2 bedrooms? Yes or no? What's the size? So it is very straightforward. And Carmen's correcting me. I must have said the wrong year. We released these standards in April 2019 originally, and we've been working on them since then. So we have, because we've gotten lots of feedback on all sides of this, of either you're going too far or you're not going far enough. We have included the option for the board to retain the special permit process that is currently included in our zoning ordinance. So that option is there and has been advertised for the board to consider during the public hearing. We have also, in terms of the process, we've gotten a lot of comments about enforcement and making sure that these accessory living units don't grow over time. And we currently have a requirement that every 5 years you have to come in for a renewal of your accessory dwelling unit. So we have now proposed, we had originally brought forward that 5 years. We've now proposed to lower it to 2 years for your first inspection. So our Department of Planning and Development staff would go out there and make sure that you're still meeting the size, you're still meeting the number of bedrooms, you're still meeting all of the requirements that are applicable. So if you, based on the record of compliance, we could then issue up to every 5 years. You would still need to come in then every 5 years for that renewal. In terms of the size, currently we have a 35% size of the principal dwelling that's permitted for the accessory dwelling units. Now we propose to actually ratchet that back a little bit. We propose for the interior accessory living units to be 800 square feet or 40% of the principal dwelling, and that's whichever is less. So this is to make sure that they truly are subordinate in nature to the main dwelling. We have included an option for the board to consider during the public hearing process that they can consider allowing, if it's in the basement, it can be the entire basement instead of that 800 square foot. And really the rationale is Carmen and I have worked on special permit applications for accessory dwelling units. And if they're larger, they'll just basically gerrymander and carve out the basement just to meet whatever the maximum size. And they'll say, oh, well, this library, it's shared, or this office is a shared space. So we're just really reflecting the reality of what we've seen out there with the special permit applications. So in terms of the detached, we have proposed 1,200 square feet for the detached accessory living units, but it would still need to be subordinate to the principal dwelling. In terms of the occupancy, we currently have a requirement that one part of the dwelling, be it the principal or the accessory dwelling, must be occupied by somebody who's either 55 years in age or older, or a person with a disability. Now, the board had asked us to add an option to remove that requirement for the occupancy. So that's been advertised and is under consideration for the board during the public hearing process. And then lastly, in terms of parking, so currently we do not have a parking regulation. The Board of Zoning Appeals just determines what parking might be sufficient. So we have proposed to require an additional off-street parking space for the interior accessory living units. And the BZA would continue to make the determination on parking for detached. So this means that, let's say you have a single family detached dwelling and it's on a public street, you would need to show that you not only do you meet the required 2 off-street parking spaces that the ordinance requires, but you can provide an additional 3rd space. Now, it might be you have 4 spaces in your driveway or 3 spaces in your driveway, but you would need to show that to us. Now, this may eliminate certain dwellings from being able to have the accessory living unit if they cannot accommodate that on site. There is a special permit option we have added, so maybe there's a good reason that they want to go to the BZA and say, oh, I live right near a bus stop, so I have a good reason to ask for basically to not have to provide that spot, and the board could, or the BZA could look at that and approve or deny it. So we also do have a front yard coverage requirement for driveway surfacing in most districts, either 25 or 30%, depending on the districts. So that ensures that people don't pave over their entire yard to be able to accommodate this parking space. I had alluded to advertising and ranges, so I'm just going to touch really quickly on what the options are. And I do think it'll be really helpful if you have comments to provide where within the advertised range you would like the board to go. So that will help them with their decision-making process. In terms of the administrative permit, I did mention that we have included the allowance to keep the special permit process. We have a range in the sizes for the interior accessory living unit from 500 to 1,200 square feet, still having that 40% or 40%, whichever is less. And then the basement is an option. So it's not something we propose, but it is an option for the board to consider. The age or disability, as I mentioned, we do have the allowance to for the board to retain that age or disability. And then the detached accessory living units, we've included a range from 700 to 1,500 square feet. In terms of the accessory living units and monitoring, we've had a lot of questions of, is this going to, kind of explode as soon as we adopt these provisions or whatever the board does end up adopting? And we did look to our sister jurisdictions to give us an inkling of what's happening in the jurisdictions around us, those that have amended their zoning ordinances in terms of their accessory dwelling unit provisions. So we do expect modest increases in the accessory living units if the board does approve the changes. Since the provisions were put into our zoning ordinance in 1983, we have approved 219 accessory dwelling units and only denied 17 of those dwelling units. So other jurisdictions, like I mentioned, Arlington and Montgomery County, Arlington has only seen 32 attached and 32 attached and 38 detached accessory dwellings since they amended in 2018. So I do want to note and caveat with these numbers that we have proposed more of a middle ground approach where we're still retaining a lot of the standards, like the requirement for the interior unless you have more than 2 acres. We have an owner occupancy standard. So, we want to caveat that when you look at these numbers, that their provisions are definitely more lenient, a little more liberal than what we proposed with Fairfax County. Montgomery County, they also amended their ordinance. They did amend it just before the pandemic began, so they don't have a lot of numbers provided, but they usually average around 50 a year. So all of this said, this means that it'll allow us some time for monitoring and coming back to the board to show, what kind of data have they collected, what kind of information is out there, and how are the regulations going. With that, I will turn it over to Carmen.
Hey, so the next big topic that I know we've gotten a lot of feedback on, and I saw that it was in the Holmes Run Acres letter, was the home-based business use. So this is a consolidation of 3 different ways that you can have a business in your home in the current zoning ordinance. So currently you can go to the counter, pay $50, get a home occupation permit. The zoning ordinance has a kind of a short list of things that are not allowed as a home occupation, and then it has a non-exclusive list of types of things that are allowed. So, and where Casey and I work in zoning administration, we do a lot of interpretation of, should this be allowed? Should that be allowed? So that's kind of how that one works. The home occupation allows one employee, one non-resident employee, I should say. So anybody who lives at the dwelling can be part of that home occupation. And it does have to be issued to someone who is a resident, and that's their principal residence. But they can have one non-resident employee as well. And a home occupation permit is also allowed in any kind of dwelling. Then the next way that we can currently have a business in the home is with a home professional office. And it does have to be some kind of a licensed professional, like a doctor or an accountant or something. That has to be approved by a special permit. It's only allowed in a single family dwelling. The BZA would condition how many clients or customers perhaps. And they can also allow them to have up to 4 to 6 non-resident employees, depending on the lot size. And then the last way that we can currently have a business in the home is with a special permit or a barbershop or beauty parlor. Those are, again, they're allowed in any kind of dwelling. They are not allowed to have any employees, and the facilities have to be designed to accommodate one patron at a time. So we've got this kind of varying approach, and we have tried to consolidate it and have a more uniform approach that would apply to all types of home businesses, so that if they meet the standards, then they can get an administrative permit like the current home occupation. And then if they don't meet them, or they want more, for instance, then they could go to the BZA for that special permit. So we did feel that it was needed to really clarify what types of uses might be allowed as a home business. So we've carried forward the instructional. So for today, currently that home occupation permit, I should back up a little bit. It's allowed to have, it's not allowed to have any customers except with any kind of teaching activity. So what we're proposing to carry forward on the instructional uses. And here it could be anything from, just your math tutor, or maybe a trumpet lesson, to a Pilates class. It's really any kind of instructional activity. And currently you are allowed to have 4 students at a time and 8 in a day. So anyway, that was just a little bit of backup. I apologize. So then, as continuing on with what uses are allowed, proposed to be allowed, bringing forward the instructional, an office use, of course, and that is not like what I'm doing right now. It's not teleworking. This is an office like you have a business where you register your business to your home. Repair of small household items like a musical instrument or a watch. Again, carrying forward the barbershop or hair salon, but we've added some qualifications to this, that some of the other uses that someone might think could be allowed, we wanted to clarify that they're not. So no nails, and that's because in consultation with our Land Development Services Department, there are concerns about inadequate ventilation in a home for doing the nails. No massage, that's not allowed to be licensed in the home. Sewing or tailoring is also carried forward from our current ordinance list. Now, retail and handcrafted items or food, those would be allowed, but they could not have somebody walk in and walk out with a product. So they would have to arrange for mailing or offsite delivery. And it's really, we found that it's pretty typical in a lot of zoning ordinances, and it means that you're not going to turn your residential neighborhood into having convenience store type of activity. And so then how we've put this all together with some standards. So for the administrative permit, we are proposing to allow just 2 customers at a time and 6 in a day. And these would need to be by appointment only, and they would need to be spaced 15 minutes apart with no overlap. And that 15-minute spacing is something that's commonly used in the approved home child care applications, for instance. So we know that type of thing can be useful, and it can work. Now we have reduced, as you can tell, we have this box here saying, yes, we reduced it from 4 at a time and 8 in a day from a previous draft that we had, but that also is reducing the current home occupation instructional uses. They're allowed to have 4 at a time, 8 in a day. So if they have somebody has a valid home occupation permit, they could continue to operate under that. But if they came back in to get the new home-based business permit, they would have to reduce it down to 2 at a time and 6 in a day. And then that cumulative of 6 would also need to take into account any short-term lodging gas that you have. And also as a qualification, if there's a home childcare, that's a separate use. And if there's home childcare on site, they're not allowed to have any customers because there's already a lot going on at that dwelling. We are also pulling back on the employees because we're only proposing to allow one employee in a single family detached dwelling only. So as I said before, currently a home occupation is allowed in any kind of dwelling and is allowed to have one non-resident employee. So we're pulling back on that. And that's really, we've heard a lot of concerns in the outreach about parking. So that's a change, you know, like with the customers and the employees. We're kind of trying to ratchet it back a little bit in response to concerns that we have heard. As to size, we are recommending to impose a size, 400 square feet. That would include any storage and anything else where that area is devoted to the business. And this is intended to make sure that it does stay subordinate to the principal use as a residence. And then here, similar to the short-term lodging use, they would need to designate the availability of one parking space for a customer. And just like with the accessory living units, we do have a range of options advertised for the board's consideration. And it takes you all the way, like, well, we have range in terms of size, number of employees and customers. It takes you all the way down for the customers down to 0 or up to 4 at a time, or 0 and up to 8 in a day. And for the employees, we kept it at 1 for the single family detached because that's carrying forward the current ordinance. But we also would allow the board to consider allowing 1 in any dwelling unit type. And that was based on some board feedback that we received. But these are, you know, wide ranges, all the way, you know, like I said, down to 0 for the customers, up to a higher number than what staff is recommending. So I would encourage you to let the board members know where you might fall within those advertised options. And so thank you for inviting us to come and talk to you. And I think, as you probably know, we do have our public hearing with the Planning Commission tomorrow evening. And then the board public hearing is scheduled for March 9th. Of course, you know, we do not anticipate that the Planning Commission is going to take action tomorrow evening. So I'm sure they'll be deferring decision, but we do encourage you to participate in that public hearing tomorrow. And then if the board does take action in the spring, in March sometime, we are looking at a delayed effective date of July 1. We'll certainly need time for training to update all our forms. And the part that we're really excited about is after adoption, it's going to be put onto a new online platform that'll have enhanced navigation and search functions, better hyperlinks, and it'll be responsive to your different device types. But that's not what you're seeing in the PDF for review at this point. That'll happen after adoption. Something to look forward to. And there are lots of ways for people to contact me and Casey. We have a dedicated email that we check every day. We do have a Fairfax County Zoning Facebook page, so check that out. And then we have our ZMod website where we have posted all of our documents and presentations that we've done over the years. So you can watch videos, you can watch presentations, you can read all the documents there. And then, of course, you can still call us. And with that, thank you for listening, and we are happy to try to answer any questions.
Yeah, so I know folks had a lot of questions, and so you should have a hand raise function, or you can just kind of unmute your mic and or send us a question in the chat too, or the Q&A.
Nicole, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
Hi, Carmen and Casey. Thanks so much for giving us a little presentation. I have 1,000 questions, but I'm only going to ask a few. I think the first major overarching one is, has the county given any consideration to splitting ZMOD so that you can go forward during the pandemic with that portion of ZMOD that truly is just modernizing and a cleaning up, but hit the pause button on the social engineering aspect of ZMOD that many of us are having a really difficult time digesting because it hit us out of left field. We really took on faith that this was a cleaning up exercise. And when we start talking about abolishing the special permit process and removing public hearing, therefore removing citizen input, that's a completely different set of concerns and a completely different, I mean, for lack of a better word, Pandora's box that I think needs just a whole lot more thought and vetting than it has had. The 100 or so public outreach meetings notwithstanding, I mean, as an example, this one that you're giving to us now, you know, many of us are only coming up to speed on this now because we've been through the pandemic really otherwise engaged. And frankly, kind of under a lot of pressure and stress to focus on other things, not on what the county may or may not be doing as concerns ZMOD. I know you all, this is your daily job, so you do this all the time, so you're amply familiar with it. But for the rest of us, it's what we have to pack into those precious extra free hours that we have in a day, and it's hard. It's hard to do. So I think as concerns our neighborhood, maybe that's where I'll start. We have a historic neighborhood. We have relatively large lots for inside the Beltway, and we have relatively small homes on those relatively large lots. So we are a hot target for developers because, yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, right? If I want to flip a house, I look for the cheapest thing to tear down on the nicest lot where I can make the most money by putting something bigger on. That's no brainer. It seems to me that when you now allow accessory living units de facto by right, and you allow home-based businesses by right, you're in essence creating duplexes where we once had single-family homes. I mean, we don't call it that because I think the citizenry would cry foul. So instead, we take away the permit process that precludes being able to do that without some level of, you know, neighborly input and without a certain level of hassle, I'm going to say, just because it, you know, you put impediments in people's way and they think twice about whether they can do something or not. So you strip all that away. Now our properties, if I'm a developer, I look at my house and I say, to heck with mid-century modern. I don't care. That doesn't, you know, that's warm and fuzzy. That doesn't bring me any money. But boy, I could tear down her house. I'll buy it for market rate. I can double the size and double my income on that in 4 months. Why wouldn't I do that? I mean, it's such a hot target because now I can not only make a larger house, but I can sell it as, you know, affording rental income by right. So I think that this is just such a ticket for destroying modest scaled historic and not historic neighborhoods. And two things about that I think are really interesting. One, you mentioned that, oh, but in Arlington County, they only had 32 ALUs and 38, whatever. I think that that's a little bit of a misleading number because it doesn't address, and in Vienna, the same thing is going on. It does not address the unbelievable amount of teardowns and new builds that are going on. And so, you know, if you're only talking about the one repercussion that could happen, and you've only given it 2 years to happen, and you're saying, oh, these numbers are pretty low, nothing to worry about. I think you need to, if you're going to make a broad sweep, you know, comprehensive plan change, I think it's incumbent upon us to look 7 generations out, not 2 years out. So that's that's a huge concern of mine. And then I think, I don't know, I mean, I want to let other people ask, but there's just so many other concerns. We know so much more now about our relationship with the environment, how critical it is. We know so much more about global warming, and really pretty much everybody agrees that climate change is here to stay. There are articles about, people under the age of 45 and older people who are moving and buying homes based on global warming and what the climate change may do, getting out of floodplains, staying away from low levels, worrying about wildfires. There's a migration of Californians moving to Colorado. I mean, all this stuff. And yet ZMOD doesn't address that at all, the impact of the environment. So now you take, again, our neighborhood, which is a garden setting with small homes, with a lot of landscape, a lot of tree coverage, a lot of natural, habitat, eco habitat. And by the time you're done allowing ALUs and home-based businesses where the ALU can have a parking place, plus it can have a home-based business, so that can have a parking place. You have 2 parking places allowed for the home-based business in the rental unit, and you have the 2 parking places allowed for the homeowner. That's four parking places right there.
No.
Okay, maybe you can clarify that.
Finish, though. Go ahead.
Okay, so, but even still, I mean, I understand that, if I'm in a pie-shaped lot and I don't have enough room to create more surface area, I'd be denied a permit. I don't see this. I don't see this going well, and I'll tell you why. Because you've effectively put enforcement in the hands of neighbors, not in the hands of the county. And what it seems like to me is we're grabbing for low-hanging fruit. We have homeowners who have invested inordinate amount of money and time and soul into making their neighborhoods safe and established and secure and to protect their investment. And what it feels like to me is we're saying, okay, but we need to find housing quickly. And that's awesome. Your neighborhood's all stable and great place to start. Let's just double the density. In effect, what this ZMOD provision allows, whether it is exercised in 2 years, 10 years, or 20 years, is double the density of what is there now. And I don't know too many people. I mean, I'll be the first one to raise it. I purposefully looked for neighborhoods where there weren't a lot of rentals, where there wasn't a lot of flipping, because I knew we were raising children and I wanted a secure environment. And that secure environment, most people will tell you, unless you're in an urban environment, you want to know who's coming and going in your neighborhood. And now we're allowing renters in any house, and we're allowing home-based business with clients in every house. I think that is just stripping that sense of security and honestly that sense of pride in place. And the idea that, I'm going to toe the line and I'm going to do everything by the book, and then in 5 years when I go to repeat my administrative permit, somebody's going to come out and check everything and I'm going to do everything by the book. Our experience in this neighborhood, and my experience as a professional architect who has clients whom I have to repeatedly tell, I'm sorry, but we have to use some of your budget to fix something that was not done to code in your house now. And that speaks to lack of enforcement. It just does. So I don't feel like Fairfax County has the staff or the money right now to enforce what is in the books now, and to take what little bit neighbors have to kind of objective input that they can have in the way of a public hearing, to take that out of the picture and hope that we're not going to have issues. It just seems not well thought out at this point. Stop. I got more, but I want others to.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I want to make sure that we get everybody a chance to answer, or to ask questions, but I'll let Casey and Carmen answer your questions.
Well, I'll try to hit some of them. Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah, I know.
But I will say, as far as, I think you started by asking, is it possible to separate out some things? And I would say yes, and that's why Casey and I both, we are focusing on those advertised options and the breadth of them. So most of ZMOD is not a wholesale revision of the zoning ordinance. We are bringing forward the vast majority of the current zoning ordinance, but we have been working on modernizing the uses, and that's where, updating the standards for the current allowances to have businesses in your home. So I went over all the different current ways. This is not new. You can have a home occupation permit today. You can have your my daughter took piccolo lessons in a condo, you can have 4 students at a time, 8 in a day. I'm just saying this is not like brand new, but have we changed the standards? We have, and that's what we've been talking about. The advertised options basically take you from one extreme to the other. So for instance, if you do not think that the board should allow any customers at a home-based business, that's within the scope of advertising. If you think that the board should keep the age or disability requirement and the special permit process for accessory living units, that's within the scope of advertising too. So by exercising the advertised options, we can get to a place where essentially we are where we are today. So in that sense, can they separate out certain items that people have concerns about? That is possible.
Likely is it likely? Because my experience is if we're pushing for social reform, social change, social. If the goal of this, which it clearly is solving a housing crisis. You mentioned that we can have home-based businesses now, and we can, but we can only have them with a special permit. We can't have them.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
Remember, I talked about that home occupation permit, $50 over the counter. We have issued 9,366 home occupation permits.
Okay, so now we're going to allow 2 per house, per lot.
No, currently, you can have however many you want. So you mentioned that you're an architect. So let's say you wanted to license your architecture business to your home. Let's say you also do photography on the side. You could license that business to your home. And maybe you do web design. You could also do that. Currently, there's no limit on how many home-based businesses you can have. And that would be true going forward. But the proposed standards that relate to 1 employee or 6 customers in a day, that's cumulative for the property. So let's say you have an accessory living unit. Well, they don't get 6 and the principal gets 6. It's 6 in a day for the property. So you can have 15 home occupations if you're a very busy person. That's fine. You would still only get 6 customers in a day. So currently there's no limit on the number. I have seen many of the comments come in where people think, oh, you get 2, and they're allowing 2 in every dwelling. I'm not sure where that came from, and I'm really sorry that people are misunderstanding that. But as I said, currently there's no limit on the number, and proposed there is no limit on the number of businesses, but there are proposed limits on customers and employees, because what we're trying to do is address the potential impacts on your neighborhood, because we don't want your neighborhood to turn into a commercial area.
But I feel like removing processes directly does that. And also when you mention, so if my neighbor, gets a renter.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I do want to say a couple other things. You can have a renter now anyway.
Right.
People can rent out. You can even occupy a dwelling by right as a family, and you can have 2 roomers or boarders right now by right, no questions asked.
Don't they have to be related?
No, you can have 2 roomers or boarders unrelated. So I can have my family with however many people are in my family, and I could have 2 roomers or boarders by right now. Now, let's say instead I want to have an accessory living unit. I can't have the 2 roomers or boarders, and the accessory living unit is limited to 2 people. So what just happened? It's the same number. So if you're a numbers person, the occupancy is the same, a family plus 2 people. The only difference is that it allows flexibility for the homeowner to provide a kitchen. That's what it comes down to. Now, probably maybe not your historic homes, but an awful lot of homes have a second kitchen. Many homes are built now today with a second kitchen. So, and sometimes there's even a bedroom on that same level. Yeah. So it's just part of recognizing how our neighborhoods are being built and being used.
And who's monitoring the number of people?
So the zoning ordinance currently has, occupancy numbers. We have, the two occupants of an accessory dwelling unit in the zoning ordinance that lives there today. You can also occupy a dwelling with 4 unrelated people that lives there. That's part of the current ordinance. Who monitors it? I will say in general, the zoning ordinance as a whole is enforced on a complaint basis. But for the accessory dwelling units, we do have that proactive inspection prior to renewal that Casey outlined.
That's once every 5 years, right?
It currently is, but we are proposing to reduce that.
And is there a increase in enforcement staff as part of ZMOD so that there's actually budget being thrown at this? Because I'll say, I have to get involved in this sometimes because as a professional, if I see something that is unsafe or could affect the life and safety and welfare of somebody, I have to report it. So I have to get involved, but I'm an unusual beast because it happens to be the profession I'm in. But I'm alarmed at how many times I come across previous work that has not been built to code. And, even just driving.
Actually, I will say that is an excellent argument and one that we do think is important as to why if the board does choose to approve the administrative permit process, that more people are likely to go through it. Today, the special permit, it's a process, it's a hurdle. And sometimes people are just creating units that are illegal. And then they're more likely to have that unpermitted and not inspected construction. So if they come through an administrative permit, we're still going to make them, they still have to get, if they want to put in that kitchen, we're going to make sure that they're getting the required permits. And I think that's really important.
So you actually look for the permits? You look to see that they built it to code? You look for the egress, or do you just?
Yeah, they're going to, we will definitely be flagging it to make sure that they get their permits.
And just like I mentioned during the slide, there is that requirement to meet all health building, all the requirements, like the building code that is required to be met. And that's going to be a part of the application permit if the board does go down that avenue.
So, and this will be my last comment. I do feel like, I think that sounds good, but that hasn't been my experience in 17 years in Fairfax County. So, we have a house across the street from us that is zoned residential that's been used as a business with trucks and tarps and fences for 4 years. And I can guarantee you at least 5 or 6 people who have called in and reported it. Nothing has been done. We had some unsafe building going on in our own neighborhood after a tear down happened, and nothing was done. There was a stop order and the people were on site the next day. And the neighbor, the immediate neighbor, had a hard time, being the person. He had a life and he didn't want to spend his entire days calling the county. Calling the county, there's a violation, there's water, there's, silt, there's the fence is down, this isn't up, this wasn't used properly, this is the wrong material. Nothing was done. The Van Dyck temple that went in, they were operated as a temple before they ever applied for a special permit. And citizens called the county and said, what's going on here? Suddenly there's paving, there's trees coming down, there's 25 people showing up. What is going, can you guys investigate? Nothing was done. How do we have the confidence that, when we basically open up the ability for double the density, that anything will be done? Because you're talking about the potential of twice as many.
Like I want to stop because I know there are other people who probably have things they'd like to say as well, but it isn't doubling the density. Remember, we're carrying forward the current limitation of an ALU to be occupied by 2 people.
Okay. Yeah, so we've got a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to read one of those and then we'll ask again if somebody wants to say something verbally. Let's see. So Sarah wanted to know, in summary, how can we prevent the mod from ruining the low density, very green, modest scale feel of this historic and unique neighborhood? I think you guys may have touched on that a little bit, but.
Would you like us to address that as well, Nicole?
Yeah, I guess just probably maybe kind of pull out what you were saying before about how it's actually not doubling. Well, you kind of just touched on doubling the density.
Sure. Right. Yeah. We're not proposing any changes to any, setback requirements, any building heights, any impervious restrictions. We still have front yard coverage, rear yard coverage. None of that is changing. So you would still need to go through any of our current processes to add an addition, as well as any additional levels of review that might be needed in this historic area.
And I'll just kind of tap on that with, if this does become an HOD and somebody is doing any of those things that require a building permit, then obviously they're going to be going to the ARB and having to meet the zoning requirements of the HOD and obviously working within the design guidelines. So do we have any other, I know there's another question in the chat, but I want to see if anybody else had one that they wanted to ask out loud.
Yeah, I had a question. This is Patrick. I just wanted some additional information on the parking. So with the ancillary living units, so my driveway, for example, I believe I can fit 3 cars in there. So is that an additional parking space in addition to that? I mean, how do you scale between what I know I can fit 3 cars in my driveway if I put 1 underneath the carport and 2 behind that, versus is the requirement for the ancillary living unit to be a separate and distinct parking area?
That's a very good question. So if you have a carport that accommodates 1 car and then a driveway that accommodates 2, then that would count as 3 parking spaces. And so then
that would be allowed. Okay.
That would be if you're on a public street. If you're on a private street, you're required to have 3 off-street parking spaces, so you would need a total of 4. But
okay.
Okay, and then the next question, Jenny wanted to know, have the implications of these changes for tax revenues been forecasted? Do you guys have any information on that?
No, we do not. I don't think that we can guesstimate, how many people are going to have home-based businesses under the new regulations, or how it may not change too much. So we can't predict that.
Well, if this is Jen, can I follow up to that? Well, certainly you can't predict the exact number, but if you're making the changes, you know what the demand is, don't you?
So like Carmen mentioned, we currently, since 2008, have issued over 9,000 of these permits. Some of them have customers if they're instructional, some don't. So we have not forecasted, and our consultant has not provided any studies on what the changes could be in terms of tax revenue.
So I work for a consulting firm, and it can't be forecasted. I would suggest that because, as Edith mentioned, I would certainly not stay in this area if it became, even more crowded than it already is. I already think it's overcrowded, and the traffic congestion is awful. I can see if this does spin out of control, I can see this actually lowering tax revenue. Well, maybe it raises tax revenue, but in the end, I mean, the costs of services delivered by the county would rise with all of the new people, and I could see it then becoming a problem financially. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Sure. I will just say that, as I mentioned previously with the monitoring, that we expect to have to come back to the board in maybe 12 months and again another 12 months, and to provide an update on any types of numbers we're receiving. Are there complaints that are being received? How are the regulations being implemented? That sort of thing. So this isn't something that we change the ordinance and then we walk away for another 40 years. It is, we intend this document to be a living document that can be amended in terms if there needs to be a course correction. So.
Right. I'm surprised that it's up at all with the issues that Edith mentioned for enforcement, because it's clear there's not enough funds already for proper enforcement. So I would just encourage you to look at the financial implications of it for the county, because I think it could be quite serious. But that's all. That's all I have to say. We can move on to the next person.
Thanks, Jenny. And Sue asked Carmen, what is the difference between a home occupation license and a business/professional license?
Oh, yeah, I put that in the chat box. So those are the current ways you can have a business in your home. So the home occupation is that administrative permit, and then the home professional office is the special permit that goes before the BZA.
Well, I have a question.
Sorry,
They both have a license. They both have to report taxes.
Yes.
Okay. During the pandemic, not only are we all working at home, but there are people who are doing things like yoga classes in their yard with a large number of people, from what I understand. How do you even begin to regulate that? This is being done on neighborhood Facebook pages, word of mouth. It's not regulated. I don't think that kind of thing will change. And my second question, that was not even asking a question, for which I apologize. Here's the thing. We have older neighborhoods with covenants, but some covenants say you cannot have a home-based business. And some of what is being proposed and what is there current does not at all make sense if you're looking at our covenants. What will take precedence? County zoning over a covenant?
A very good question. And actually, this is true today, and we've carried it forward as well. Whatever is more restrictive really is what governs. So the zoning ordinance doesn't interfere with any private covenants, nor does the county enforce them, though. So if your covenants say that you're not allowed to have a home-based business, then you're not. And so we are proposing, while we can't, according to state law, we can't hold up a permit because of HOA or other, covenants and restrictions, but we can certainly put it on the application form as a reminder that there could be more restrictive standards, and that the applicant needs to check that out.
The reality is that civic associations don't have much power, so it goes back to what Edith was talking about. You have a lot of enforcement by neighbors and peer pressure. And it just does not work, as you well know. Certainly when we're whether we have a small lot or even a very large lot. Let's face it, people can be annoying and irritating, and when we all live together, something will drive someone crazy at some point. But I guess I'm thinking that the pandemic so much changed home-based businesses, who's working from home, and basically the whole equation. And maybe that needs to be separated out, as Edith suggested, and looked at again. And I appreciate all the work that you are doing on this for the county. I realize this has been years in the making, but I also think we're not focusing on this. Most neighborhoods and people are not focusing for the last, since March, on any of these issues. So perhaps after tomorrow night's public hearing, the Planning Commission will send this back or put a halt on it. And the Federation of Citizens Association is taking a stand, pretty much asking for that on these two issues, as I understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. And Sarah asked in the comments, and Carmen replied, but would HOD restrictions, if stricter than ZMOD, take precedence even if we don't have a covenant? And the answer is yes. So that's something to think about. I will say I don't think we have any restrictions on kind of the things that we're talking about tonight in any of our HODs, but I guess it's something maybe we can think about. We're definitely running over. Are there any last questions for Carmen and Casey before we let them go tonight? Okay. Arvidas, is that you? Did you have a question? Do you have, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I was able to connect finally.
Great. Glad you made it in.
I'll get in touch discuss it by email or text or some other way.
You broke up for most of that. Were you asking how else to comment?
Maybe he could type it into the chat box.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, or if you turn your video off, it might go better.
Okay, does that work better?
Yes.
I was wondering if I could write a couple questions to Sue after the meeting, because I don't know what's been discussed. I wasn't in at the beginning. Is that doable?
I'm assuming that's fine. We're also recording this too, so so we can also make sure that you get the link to the video too if you want to see everything in full. But we'll make sure that you catch up on everything. But yeah, if there's no more questions, I really want to thank Casey and Carmen. They have been very busy for a very long time. And we really appreciate you coming and spending some time with us. And it sounds like tomorrow is Planning Commission, and that will be a very good place for, because people have the opportunity to speak, correct? Okay. So, so that's definitely a place, you guys, if you have issues and concerns, which obviously everybody does, to make sure that your voice is heard. And then also the Board of Supervisors is in March?
March 9th, yes.
Thank you. Okay. And all that information is on the ZMOD page, I'm assuming, correct? Yeah. So definitely make sure that you're reaching out to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors and your specific supervisor with all of your questions and concerns, because obviously they will be the ones that end up making the decision about what goes forward. Okay. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, thanks everybody. I know that ran, obviously, I had a feeling it was going to run a little bit long. And yeah, I think there's a lot of valid concerns, and I think a good point that was made was that maybe it's something we can talk about with in the HOD, and as we move forward, what maybe how that affects us, and we can talk a little bit more after the next part. So we are also lucky tonight to have EHT Traceries, the contractors, consultants that will be doing the design guidelines for Holmes Run Acres. So we've got Sarah Vonish and Catherine Wallace with us. We kind of went over the beginning of the design guidelines at our last meeting, and we got Traceries on board with their contract just a week or two ago. So they're just getting started in their process, but I asked them to come tonight to just kind of do a brief introduction, kind of what they're going to be doing for us through the process, and then they will be working with us throughout this process, so you will definitely see them again. So if they're not far enough along to answer the questions that you might have at this point, there definitely will be lots of time in the next so many months for them to answer those questions. So Sarah, I will pass it over to you if that works.
Yep, that works. Thank you. All right, let's see. Okay, there we go. Well, hi, everyone. Good evening. No, I don't want to leave event. I'm Sarah Vonish. I'm a project manager and historic preservation specialist with EHT Traceries, working on this project with Laura Hughes, our principal, and Catherine Wallace, an architectural historian. We're a Washington, D.C. based woman-owned small business specializing in archival research, survey, documentation, resource evaluations, regulatory compliance, and preservation planning. We've been working with Fairfax County over the last year or so on updating the design guidelines for the 13 existing HODs, as well as for the potential Holland Hills HOD. So the project goal is to create user-friendly and graphically interesting design guidelines to provide homeowners and project applicants with all the information they need for going to the Architectural Review Board and to promote the preservation and rehabilitation of the potential Holmes Run Acres HOD. So this gives you an idea of the effort that we're currently undertaking. We are preparing general design guidelines for all HODs, as well as updated design guidelines, as I said, for the 13 existing. The Holmes Run Acres design guidelines would be part of that package. But the design guidelines would focus on the character of Holmes Run Acres and the strategies and treatments recommended for preserving that character of the existing neighborhood. So we'll be developing the draft design guidelines. We'll be coming back to the work group to engage with you and to get your review and input on the draft design guidelines. Following work group meetings, we'll meet with the public and present the design guidelines and again, collect input. And then pending designation of the neighborhood as an HOD will finalize after that process with input from the Architectural Review Board. So purpose of the design guidelines to outline recommendations, not requirements. The requirements are outlined in the zoning ordinance. So these are just recommendations for preserving and maintaining the historic character of the community. They're intended to support continued evolution, not to freeze a home in the current time or force you to return the home to a appearance in the past. They are not meant to give absolute or case-specific advice. I haven't been to the neighborhood yet. You'll probably see us out there in the next couple weeks doing a survey and photographing the buildings, the landscape, site features that we see. So they'll provide guidance that's well aligned with preservation standards, the standards being the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. Those are the standards that are used by the Fairfax County. They're nationally recognized standards used throughout the country. With just guidance, it's general guidance for how to treat a historic property in an appropriate manner. So, and of course, sometimes a creative and thoughtful design solution that doesn't necessarily fit or correspond with the design guidelines as written will be approved by the ARB, depending on project-specific, site-specific, and user-specific issues. So this just gives you an idea of what the design guidelines can and cannot do. So next steps, going out and surveying and starting on our draft. We have a couple of example design guidelines that have been prepared for the existing HODs and for Holland Hills. Nicole, I don't know if you've shared them as an example, but that's what you can expect from the design guidelines. They address treatment standards for preserving and maintaining your existing home, recommendations for new construction and additions, and then finally recommendations for landscaping or site elements. And not everything that requires a building permit, not everything that's in the design guidelines requires a building permit. But again, it's just supposed to be a comprehensive document that provides users with all the information that might be useful in planning a successful rehabilitation project in the neighborhood. So that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, so we'll open it up. Like I said, we just got them on board a couple weeks ago, so they're just getting their feet wet with Holmes Run Acres. But yeah, if you have any questions about the overall process, anything that you might want to think about that you might want to expect to see in them, or how they may be used, feel free. But again, they'll be working with us throughout the rest of this process, so we'll have a lot of chance to bug them. Yeah, Keith, looks like you got your hand up.
Well, I have a question that occurred to me while we sat in on the Holland Hills presentation. We make a distinction between contributing and non-contributing buildings, right? So is a non-contributing building required or are they supposed to follow the guidelines? And if so, how would they do that if they're already non-contributing?
Uh, Nicole, jump in if you want to interrupt me, but non-contributing buildings are subject to the design guidelines. If a future project were to go forward, they would still need to follow the design guidelines. Obviously, in that case, there will usually be more latitude and flexibility for adapting a non-contributing building, but just making sure any new changes to a non-contributing building still respects and preserves the character of the HOD overall. So obviously, if a non-contributing building is a 1 or 2 story building that fits within the neighborhood, you don't want a 3 story, 4 story large house going in. You still want it to fit with the character. So that's what the guidelines try to outline.
That was exactly my concern, is that a non-contributing building could be torn down because it was non-contributing. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, I'll say I think it can still be torn down, but making sure a new building that's appropriate goes in its place is
Yeah, because I mean,
Right,
yeah,
that's-
even if they're non-contributing, they'll still have to go to the ARB to get approval of the demo permit. And then if that's approved and they go forward with new construction, they will have to go back and get approval for the new construction. And that's again where the design guidelines will come in. So they couldn't just build, even if they were approved for the demo permit, they're still going to have to try to meet the character of the neighborhood.
I have another thought to offer, but I'll let somebody else jump in if they want to right now.
Yeah, anybody else?
I guess I have a similar question, an amendment to that. Let's say they're not tearing down a non-contributing home, but they want to, like, let's take the Swiss Chalet, which, you know, the one that has the really steep roof. Let's say they're not just, because you don't apply for a permit to, you know, re-roof your house, but let's say they want to change the angle on that roof, right? The slope of it. So for that, they'd need a permit, right? And what would happen then?
Well, the roof slope is obviously a big character defining feature for mid-century houses. So again, Nicole, interrupt me if you want to. But I think that's something that would go to the ARB, and the applicant would make the case. You know, if there was some specific need or some crazy situation that made it necessary. But otherwise, like maintaining the existing roof slope is would be important in that case.
Right. So the problem with the Swiss Chalet is that its roof is super steep. Already.
Yeah.
Like it's non-conforming as it is. So if they wanted to make it even steeper or slightly less steep, but not like mid-century, how would we manage that?
Yeah, so they would have to go to the ARB for the building, like the permit to change the roof. And so at that point, if they were trying to make it steeper, my guess is that the ARB would be unwilling to permit that. If they were trying to make it less steep and more in conformance with what the neighborhood looks like, they would definitely probably be on board and help kind of shift that conversation towards that. So yeah, so anytime, again, like everything that's in the neighborhood, you know, we're not going to come to anybody that has, you know, the steep roof right now if an HOD is approved and say, okay, you've got to change your roof. But if they do come in to get a building permit, they are then required by the zoning ordinance, if there's an HOD in place, to go to the ARB and go through that process.
So I guess the one thing, I understand what you said, that makes sense. But if they were making it less steep, but not so unsteep as the mid-century roof, like would they require them to go the full mid-century direction, or would they just be happy with like, well, you're getting closer?
It would because we wouldn't have something in the zoning ordinance that would actually force them to do it, but the design guidelines would be the document that the ARB is going to be working from. And so they're going to be like, hey, look, this is what it says, the design guidelines. Can you make it less steep? Can you push it a little bit further? And it's going to be a conversation. Obviously, can't predict what would actually happen in that kind of situation, but anytime they're required to go to the ARB, that conversation is going to happen, and the ARB is going to try to make it match the design guidelines as best they can.
Okay.
Any other questions?
We were just talking to Zmod where I asked if the HOD could supersede Zmod if it is stricter than Zmod, and Zmod people said yes. But in this presentation, it sounds like the opposite is true. Which is it?
Well, the design guidelines aren't the zoning part of it. So if we put something in the zoning ordinance, and Lily's there, so if Lily wants to correct me, if we put something in the zoning ordinance that is stricter, then you would be required to meet that. Is that correct, Lily?
That is correct. The zoning, so what the ZMOD team was describing is what the requirement of the county is versus if you have an HOA. Let's say a community association or homeowners association that may require or that may limit, for example, the height of a fence to 3 feet, whereas the zoning ordinance allows up to 4 feet in the front yard. You cannot build a 4 feet high fence because your HOA requires it or limits it to 3 feet. So that's what they were explaining. But what the relationship with the zoning ordinance and the HOD design guidelines is that the development standards like the height limit and setbacks would be included in the zoning ordinance. And in this case, it would be what is allowed by the underlying zoning district, whereas the design guidelines will have additional basically additional requirements that you will work with the ARB to make what is being proposed compatible with the HOD and the the characteristics of the HOD.
So if our HOD design guidelines recommended in your example a shorter fence height than the ZMOD guidelines, which one would be enforced?
So the HOD design guidelines are not regulations, they're recommendations to make it compatible with the HOD characteristics and character defining features. Whereas what is put in the zoning ordinance is something that you cannot negotiate unless there's a path forward through a variance or a special permit or any type of
get my
discretionary.
cigarettes?
So
Are you gonna get my cigarettes?
I think he's not on mute. So basically, are these design guidelines we're working on right now? These are just recommendations, but they cannot be enforced as long as people just obey ZMOD.
Well, so there's a couple things there. Because ZMOD is just the modernization of the zoning ordinance. So what you mean probably is that, yeah, the ordinance is what will be enforced. So if we put in restrictions, so like Sue has actually asked a question about the maximum height for a single family home, which Lily, is it 30 or 35 feet?
35 feet.
35 feet. So if during this process, when we get to write our staff report and the staff makes a recommendation for an HOD, if we're in favor of it, and we say, no, we think that the maximum height should be 28 feet, and that goes into the zoning ordinance, then that is a regulation that you in HOD will have to meet no matter what, unless, like Lily said, there's a variance or something like that. Mm-hmm. If we decide that we don't want to change what is the underlying zoning ordinance, then we'll put in recommendations into the design guidelines saying that, yes, we think that for the most part, these houses should be this. And no, it's not a requirement, but when they go to the ARB, if they're putting on an addition, they're going to have to explain to the ARB why they think it needs to be taller and how it's not affecting the character of the neighborhood. And the ARB will likely not let something go forward if they think it's going to be damaging the character, and it'll be a back and forth conversation at different ARB meetings. Again, they don't generally want to reject somebody's application, but they will take the time to make sure that it fits within the historic overlay district. Did that get to it?
Correct. And the HOD design guidelines would not allow you to exceed that 35-foot height limit, even if it's built to be compatible with the characteristics of the HOD. If for example, there's a lower height limit placed for this HOD in the zoning ordinance, which would be ZMOD if it gets adopted, then let's say we adopted with 28 feet height limit, you cannot go back to 35 feet once that is approved and entered into the zoning ordinance, versus what is in the design guideline is a suggestion to make sure that it will, meet the intent of that HOD, and it would be in keeping with the characteristics of the HOD.
Nicole, can I ask a question? Sarah, what I'm understanding, because I'm confused as well, what I'm understanding is if we wanted to, for example, using the fence analogy, if we wanted to limit the height of the fence, it would have to be something that goes into the zoning part. It sounds like we have two venues. We have the guidelines and we have whatever zoning changes we make that run with our properties within the historic overlay district. And in order for it to be enforceable by zoning and not just a recommendation, it would have to be adopted into the zoning ordinance and run with the land. Is that correct? Because I guess what I'm trying, we've gotten a couple of questions from neighbors specifically about this, and so we're just trying to share them with you. And two of them are, what portion, say we go forward with the HOD, you recommend it, we adopt it, we have an HOD, and we have a set of guidelines. Where does the suggestion end and the law begin? So just again, to kind of push the envelope, you had an ornery neighbor who said, I don't care what you say, I want to build a yellow lemon-shaped 3-story building. What recourse do we have other than, hey, please go to the ARB, hey, please be nice? Where does that fall?
So Nicole can explain the ARB process better, but it's the limitations in the design guidelines are there as guidelines, true. However, you are required to go to the ARB. That part that the ARB review is required for any permit, a permit or a site plan will trigger ARB review. That is already in a zoning ordinance for the existing HODs, and it will apply to this HOD as well. So that person, that neighbor cannot say, no, I'm not going to go to the ARB. They are required to go to the ARB. However, the ARB will need to either approve that ARB application or deny it. And if it gets denied, then they're not able to get their permit issued. So that's where the regulation will come in place. But the specifications of the design itself, whether it's going to be blue or yellow or something that is, consistent with the neighborhood, that we cannot put in the zoning ordinance. That will be put in the design guidelines, and then the ARB will negotiate whether it needs to be gray or, a different shade of gray. That is something we will not put in the zoning ordinance.
So that's helpful. Is there a short list of things? We mentioned building height because we know that there is a zoning ordinance for building height max taken from the ridge or whatever. Is there a short list of items that are zoning related that would change with the HOD, that would be binding as zoning and not as recommendations?
So
go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, sorry. So those are some of the things that we've kind of touched on and we've talked about a little bit. And Lily can correct me again too. Anything that is currently regulated by the zoning ordinance is stuff that we can talk about. So height, setbacks, which we've had a lot of conversation about, massing and how it fits on the lot and how can we regulate that and should we regulate that. And so, those are the kind of things that we're talking about. Anything that we cannot regulate by the zoning ordinance, whether or not we put it in there, will be the stuff that goes in the design guidelines. So like Lily was touching on, color, the style of windows, because we can't tell you what windows to buy, right? Like that, as the county, we can't do that. And that's, that's partly by design, right? Because people don't want the government telling them exactly what windows they have to buy. So yeah, so that's kind of what we're trying to get to through this process, is figuring out, are there things that we do feel that have to go in the zoning ordinance, say like height and setbacks? And if we do think that goes in there, when we write our staff report, say we do recommend a height limitation, is the community going to support that too? Because we've also touched on that, right? Like how you guys have said, you know, we think that maybe we don't need to do all of that because that's going to make it too restrictive, and that will make it harder to pass an HOD if that's the issue. So we put that in the design guidelines. When I think what might be helpful is one of the next ARB meetings, if we have applications that are up for either a workshop or an action item that would be similar, it might be great for you guys, and I'll try to let you know to attend, because you'll see the conversations that happen. Because it does sound scary when you say, well, they're just recommendations, you know, and it's like, oh, well, then I don't have to listen to it. But in the 2.5 years that I've been going to the ARB meetings, you'll go, and a great example is Lorton. It's not a technical HOD, but it's treated as one for right now. And there's obviously a lot of new construction that happens in there, and then also a lot of additions that happen on existing construction. And you'll see the homeowners come in, and there will be a long conversation about this kind of stuff. So they're coming in to put an addition on. And so the ARB is talking to them about what materials they're using, what kind of siding, or is it brick? What kind of brick does it match the rest of the neighborhood? And they'll go back and forth, and they'll ask them to come back with a new design if it's not quite right. Obviously, they can't eventually say no, but they're gonna lead the applicant to the place that they need to be. And so I think we have some of the ARB members on too if they want to chime in. They don't have to, but that's their role. And I think Sarah kind of touched on it too, is that, you know, we're not trying to freeze anything in time, and right. The ARB is not trying to make this any more difficult than it is, because obviously now if we do put the HOD in place, you've got to come to at least one meeting, possibly more than depending on your application. And so
I get that. I mean, that's part of the questions. And actually, you know, one of the sidebar discussions we've had is we keep coming back to a couple of things that are germane to Homes Run Acres. One of them is the garden-like setting. I mean, you could regulate the heck out of the buildings. You could put as many recommendations, but if somebody comes in and tears down the garden-like setting, and that's not just like a couple of trees, that's actually stuff that's been growing for 70 plus, you know, years. So it's got a wide variety and all that kind of, but I don't see any way to regulate that or recommend that. So that's really kind of what we're up against. And then the other thing that I think I've said at almost every meeting is that these houses were built as starter homes to be expanded. There was the architects really expected them to be expanded. So we want to make sure that we don't hamstring people. Really what we're trying to do is just say, hey, if you need that extra space, think about doing it, you know, here versus there. But the question, I've gotten 2 questions from the neighborhood. One of them was, if I was not here when, or if I wasn't here when the HOD was adopted and I buy into this, is it just buyer beware, or can I still go rogue? So there was one person who said, I love McMansions. I don't know if he does, or he was just trying to get our vote. He said, I love McMansions. And then he had a follow-up email and said, look, you know, I bought my house after you all decided to pursue an HOD. So I wasn't part of the 73% of the neighborhood who voted in favor of this. You know, where does that leave me? You know, I want my rights, kind of thing. So I did not have a clear answer for him.
I can answer that. The HOD is based, as part of the HOD, we're going to prepare zoning ordinance amendment, a rezoning application, and a comprehensive plan amendment as well. So what that does is it creates an overlay. The HOD is a historic overlay district, so it's a zoning district, and you would have by all the regulations and requirements of this HOD, whether it gets established or not. For example, the underlying R2 zoning district is not going to change. And any person that buys into this property, regardless of when they bought into this neighborhood, would have to meet all the R2 zoning ordinance requirements. So the same will happen. It's treated the same way. So once it's established as an HOD, then whoever comes in after it gets established will have to meet all of that requirement.
Thank you, Lily. I think that's helpful because it sounds like to me if they really wanted to, push us against the wall, the answer would be that which can be modified in zoning, which really I think are two things, height and setbacks, because that dictates massing, right? If either or both of those get adopted, that's zoning. That's your new parameter.
That would be the new parameter, yes. But we're very careful about adding additional height restriction and additional setbacks, because what could potentially happen is the properties within this HOD would be, for lack of a better word, penalized because they're going to be restricted more than all the R2 zoning districts we have in the county. So
I get it.
We will look at that and we will consider it. And if we can make that finding that that's the only way we can protect both the structures and, like you said, the garden-like characteristics of the landscaping, we will do that. But we would rather defer to the design guidelines to address that, because the setting, the structure size, the small sizes of the structures, this garden-like or the landscaping, all of that would probably be identified as a character-defining feature. So the character-defining feature, the design guideline is there to protect the character-defining features. So we prefer to put it in the design guidelines, but this will be a discussion once we're done with identifying the character-defining features and contributing, non-contributing structures. That will be a discussion this work report will have, and then depending on what you decide, we will take it to the larger community. We're going to have a community meeting, and then that would also be discussed at the Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors, and we will decide whether to include additional limitations in the zoning ordinance or not.
So I think these are important conversations to have, because what we don't want to end up with is, like somebody forwarded to me an article on a totally different subject, but an article about a homeowners association, I think in Alexandria, where somebody tried to put up a sign that was a little bit too big, and it got embroiled in a lawsuit because the covenants of the HOA precluded that size, and it went so far that it ended up bankrupting the HOA. I mean, the very last thing we want to do in this community is create any animosity. So, I mean, it sounds to me like potentially the most legally restrictive thing, and I'm not even sure if it's legally restrictive, would be the requirement to go to the ARB prior to getting a building permit. If we didn't amend the zoning ordinance at all.
That's not up to negotiation, actually, because it's already in the zoning ordinance and is applicable to the 13 existing HODs we have. If Holland Hills is established, they will be applicable to that one, and we have a new one that we're looking at as well. So any HOD will require ARB requirement.
Okay.
So Edith hit on something that's, I think, really important that we don't need to talk about tonight, but maybe we have a session about it, is sort of the legalities of things, because my big concern is, okay, so the ARB is made up of both the county and potentially some members of the neighborhood. And I always wonder that situation that was just brought up by Edith is HOAs get sued all the time for, different reasons. We'll just say different reasons. So in the case of an HOD, I think in the future we should talk about both legalities. What are the boundaries of the HOD? And I know we've been bouncing around it a little bit today, but to just really sit down and understand. So when we create these, what the HOD can do versus what it cannot do, what fits into zoning, what doesn't fit into zoning, and then to also understand what organization would be liability sort of culpable if there was a suit that took place, because we don't have an HOA, we don't have all of these funds to handle any sort of lawsuit. So it'd be nice in the future. We don't have to deal with it today, but to understand the legalities of where the risk lies and the responsibility.
No, I think that's good. We'll touch on that. I do want to let Sarah and Catherine head out if there's no more questions about design guidelines. Like I said, this is just the kind of beginning of the process for them. So we'll have lots of time to ask them questions in the future. You can always email me if you think of anything in the meantime in between meetings, and I can make sure that Sarah sees them and gets back to us. So
Just real quickly, did you say that Holland Hills has already gotten their draft guidelines, or where are they in the process? Is that something we can share with our neighborhood?
yeah, they're the ones that we talked about last time, and then I sent a link to them in a share file after the last meeting, but I can send them again to you. I think they're also on, if you just go to the Fairfax County website and search Holland Hills, you'll get their webpage, and they should be on there. You can probably find them under, they just had their community meeting on Monday, and they, I think they're linked under there too. So, but I'll send them out.
Can I make a comment on that? Edith, I don't know if you attended that HOD meeting for Holland Hills for their guidelines. I did. The last thing in the world we want to do is share the Holland Hills HOD guidelines with our community, or else we'll have a total rebellion. They are incredibly detailed. They would make no sense at all. For example, there seemed to be one guideline that the windows needed to have iron frames. And then there was a discussion of that. And then the response was, well, if you wanted aluminum or something else, just ask the ARB and they'll approve it. Well, it made no sense at all that there would be a guideline telling you what kind of frames to have if you could immediately overturn it in a discussion with the ARB. But in addition to that, why would you want to have such detailed guidelines? It's only asking for trouble.
I'm just going to jump in and say one thing. I think that reader misread the design guidelines. They're not prescriptive. They're just general guidance. First guideline for Windows in that instance was, maintain and repair your existing windows. If that's not possible, replace them to match the existing or historic and the profile and color and appearance. But there's no requirement or prescriptive guideline to force you to replace iron windows. And
I know, yeah, I know it's not prescriptive, but it made no sense at all that it was even there as a design guideline. Because, for example, throughout our neighborhood, we're not trying to replace or repair our windows so that they're historic. We're trying to get double and triple panes, all those kinds of things. So it seems to me, other than saying more broadly, we need as much glass as you can afford on the front side of your house, that we should not get any more detailed than that. Otherwise, we're just asking for trouble. People are going to
and they don't say you can't have multiple panes, dual pane glass. They say when you replace your windows, try to match the historic appearance as much as possible to retain the character of the building. So,
and I will say that more than likely the design guidelines as they're drafted will go into a great amount of detail because, while again, they're not requirements, we're trying to preserve the character, and there's multiple ways to do that. And so, as Sarah said, obviously we're building these off of traditional preservation practices, right, for historic districts. And so, and every historic district is different, which is why you're going to get your community specific guidelines. But it is going to start out by saying preserve first, because that's what we're trying to do, is preserve the character. And then from there, there's going to be a whole bunch of options of recommendations of other ways that we would recommend that you try to do that. And so they are going to be detailed. And so it might be helpful for people to start seeing them now and to start understanding the different options that are within them. Because that is likely what we'll see for Holmes Rent Acres, except for obviously it will pertain to your material, your windows, your doors, all of that.
I guarantee you it's going to cause a reaction because people don't understand the distinction and they won't understand it either. And also, the more detail you get, the more times you have to go back to the ARB and the more expensive it gets. And that's going to be another sticking point. People are going to say, well, how much more? in terms of time and money is this going to cost me if I have to keep going back to the ARB or bring my architect or bring my contractor? So we're going to have to deal with all of that.
Yeah, and that's one of those issues. That's one of the fine lines that we're working within, and that will end up being kind of I think and why we obviously, as we go through this and as we get further with design guidelines, why we bring them to the community so they can see and they can decide for themselves whether or not it is worth it or if it's not worth it. Our role at the county is to see if there is a historic district that is worth preserving, and from there we make that recommendation. But the Board of Supervisors is obviously going to make decisions based on that, but also based on what the community thinks too. I mean, if the community looks at all of this and is like, if a large majority shows up to all these meetings and send comments and are like, this is a terrible idea. I can't speak for the Board of Supervisors, but they take that stuff into account. As staff, we're just tasked with trying to decide if there is a community worth of a historic overlay district, and that's what we're trying to work with you guys to figure out.
And I just want to say, Keith, I appreciate what you're saying. And I think what Nicole said is a fine line, I think is really true, because if it has to have some detail and teeth for it to be meaningful. And I think, I mean, I don't know how else to say this, but I think that sometimes if you can give, what it's trying to do is develop a set of guidelines that speak to the character of the house, not the materiality of the house. So certainly if you're trying to put in glass block instead of brick or something, you might run into some problems. But I think what we're really trying to obviate is, people replacing their picture windows with double hungs or OG arches, or, just things that are just grossly out of character with the neighborhood. And in order to try to guide people towards that, sometimes you have to put more detail in. So I appreciate your comment, but I think hopefully we can, it's difficult with these Zoom meetings because we can't hold a town hall and kind of, throw out examples and go, would this work, would this not? But I keep coming back to the head of the Pope Leahy house saying, they would never put a tar and gravel roof back on the Pope Leahy house because it's just formidably expensive. So there's an example of, a Frank Lloyd Wright house that's getting different materials, but it's still maintaining the character of the house. Anyway, I'm going off.
And I think, and that is, I think something, Patrick.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that, I agree with Edith, and part of the discussion here that's going on. I completely respect what Keith is saying, because it's also my concerns is so we don't like to say it, but an HOD and an HOA is restrictive. If you don't have restrictions, there is nothing to preserve or protect. And so I think what our challenge is working within the neighborhood and discussing that, publicly, is what do people want? If the answer is, it's not so much we don't want to tell people what type of windows or, make recommendations of what type of windows and things like that. The question becomes, then what are we preserving? You can't have an HOD based on simply square footage. You have to have characterization and something that's worth protecting. And I think that's the discussion we have to have with the neighborhood. And I agree with you, Keith, by the way, that it could be a challenge and it could turn some people off. But what I think the neighborhood needs to understand is HOAs, HODs, those types of designations come with some level of control and guidance over what's going to happen. And if people aren't comfortable with that, as Nicole mentioned, then the county will make a decision that that's not something worth preserving as an HOD. So, we have to understand where we sit. We have to understand where our neighbors sit on this. And it's a challenge. I think I don't like the idea of telling people necessarily what to do in terms of windows. I know for a fact I'm not putting Anderson windows in my house. When I finally need to replace them, I'm going to do something else. So I kind of respect that. But if we're not comfortable as a neighborhood getting to the point of actually defining what the characterization is or the character of the neighborhood is, then it won't be approved by the county. So that's just sort of my little assessment.
Yeah. So, but I am going to let Sarah and Catherine head out. But I think this was a really good beginning conversation. And again, we've got a long way to go with the design guidelines. And I think just kind of what we've started to touch on is a lot of the conversation that we'll be having over the next few months. And I know that Holland Hills, when they first saw the design guidelines too, had the same reaction that you had, Keith. And so they're, working on seeing if there's a happy medium. And, again, obviously none of this is going to work for everybody. So we're trying to figure out the best solution for everybody.
I think the biggest issue is going to come in managing misinformation, really, because even just what we're talking about right now, the example with the windows, a picture window is made by no fewer than 100 different manufacturers, and you can buy one for cheap, and you can buy one for less cheap, and you can buy one with low E-glass, and you can buy one single pane, and all of that. Nobody's restricting any of that. All the people are saying is, hey, if you're trying to mid-century, then the mid-century window for the big picture windows is a fixed window, the big dimension, whatever we decide to call it. So I think people are getting in the weeds about, the misinformation again about whether it's aluminum or steel or wood or whatever. That's not germane to the character necessarily. Of course, if you wanted to stay historically accurate, if that were the mandate to stay, if we wanted to build everything with pre-1950 old growth wood and, whatever, but nobody in this day and age would replace a window with a single pane glass window. You can't even meet code doing that. So I don't think we're talking about recreating the past. We're talking about maintaining some of the character. And I think the really hard job, and Keith, I understand what you're saying. I think the really hard job is to explain that and educate that, because again, we had that meeting, the very first historic overlay meeting where people were up in arms about the roof, and I thought it was people were up in arms about the pitch of the roof, and it turns out people just didn't want to be forced to put on tar and gravel, and nobody's going to be forced to put on a tar and gravel roof. So I think that sometimes people get upset about the restrictions, and it's actually based on misinformation. And that's my biggest concern, is that every pushback that I've gotten, literally every pushback that I've gotten in the neighborhood, in my personal email inbox, has been misinformation that with a one-on-one discussion, I've been able to help people understand where we come down on these things, with the exception of the legality of I want a McMansion, I can do whatever I want. That's a totally different thing. But for me, that's the hardest thing to get my hands around, because I can't, in a neighborhood of 350 people, I can't continue to answer one-on-one emails.
Yeah.
So I think that let me interject something here, because I totally see Keith's point. And right now, I think that if we were to take guidelines to the community today, they would overwhelmingly reject it, because we have not done good communications on this. Because you're exactly right that this is complex and there's a lot of misunderstanding. We're not going to be able to present these to them and say, okay, we need your vote in a week. It's going to take months to explain this stuff to them and make sure everyone is clear and everyone understands. And we've done an absolutely terrible job of communicating so far. So we need to find a way. I mean, we've had this discussion offline, Nicole, but I'm sure we'll continue it offline, but we need to find a way to start explaining things to people now, and a system to get people's questions answered now, because if we wait until the very end of it, they're just going to say oh, I'm hearing about this and you want it in a week, and they're going to say no. And all these 2-hour meetings for months, lost, worthless.
Yeah, no, our plan is not to wait till the very end to do that. And that's kind of why we pulled on traceries earlier than we did for Holland Hills, because that was part of the issue too. And so our plan is, I was going to talk about schedule at the end of this, so I guess we'll just kind of head into that, because I'm not sure we're going to get to anything else tonight.
I say one thing here.
Yeah.
You've got to be careful where the misinformation comes from, because I was going off of what somebody actually said they were reading from the Holland Hills guidelines. It wasn't just somebody speculating. So I don't know where it came from, but
yeah,
we'll have to be careful.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we're going to talk about having another work group meeting, but what I also wanted to talk about was after this meeting, I was going to start to kind of hammer out more of a detailed schedule. We still have a long way to go, And so kind of what we wanted to do is through the work group is start this process to kind of get an idea about what the community concerns were. And then we're going to start reaching back out to the community again. And it's not going to be with the design guidelines like next month or anything like that. That's going to be months from now. And so that's what I need to know from you. And Edith has kind of touched on this before is what's the best way to reach out to your community? We're obviously going to have at least one more community meeting, but probably another one after that too. And then there's also the PC and the board, but that's way off in the future. And so we need to talk about, we're probably going to do a mailing. So kind of like an update on like, hey, this is what we started. This is where we're at. And this is where we're going to be going. So there's a lot of that's going to be happening. And this part is just kind of the beginning of it. And because, yeah, we don't know what's going in the design guidelines yet. So we don't want to send them out like, hey, these are random design guidelines. But we do need to start that process. And that was kind of where I was getting to at the end of, I think I had on the agenda to talk about the next steps. So
I think part of the,
go ahead, Patrick.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think, I don't think it's helpful to the neighborhood for them to see all of our comments and the recordings that we have. I think it's helpful if we could figure out, and like I said, I know we've had lots of emails in the neighborhood on how to best communicate. I think just even just posting the agendas at a top level so that people know what we're talking about might be just an easy first step. And then people can, they can reach out. We can maybe reach out to all of us that are sort of on the panel here within the acres to give us some thoughts and things like that. But, seeing our chats and hearing the dialogue is probably not helpful to them. But understanding the topics and the agendas is probably an easy way to just sort of say, this is what we're doing without getting into a lot of complexity. And so that would be my recommendation.
Well, I will say that so the agendas are posted for the meeting on the Holmes Run Acres webpage. And then also, which I sent out to you guys a few weeks before, and that link is on the bottom there too. So if folks aren't sure, they're always able to go there and see that beforehand. So that way they can participate.
So
and also, if you guys are getting a lot of questions.
The easy thing is for us, the easy thing maybe for us, Edith, to do is say, here's the agenda. Let us know your concerns. You can reach out to any of us, 6 members, 7 members, whatever, and give us your thoughts before we talk about these things. And maybe that's one form.
Real quick, Edith, I just want to say, if you guys are getting a lot of questions, I would love them to be forwarded to me and Lily, especially if there's zoning questions, because I am happy to email and call anybody that has specific questions. And so hopefully that will kind of cut down on the misinformation. And my contact information should also be on that webpage. So you guys will have it, but yeah.
I can tell you, we tried internally in our work group here in Holmes Run Acres to come up with one of the 6, or even with the alternates, 8 of us to be the secretary to take meeting minutes that could work for the acres, and just none of us has stepped forward. I think we're all just maxed out. Over the weekend, just because there started to be some buzz about HOD, I forget what started it, honestly. I'm maxed out on emails at this point, but there was some buzz on the listserv, and I get the listserv as a digest every day. I don't get it in real time. So, I open up my email in the morning and I see all this conversation. And so I spent the better part of the weekend trying to pull together a brief history of how we got here that's germane to Holmes Run Acres, that highlighted the process, the question, how we got here. And I added the Board of Supervisors motion, so you can see right in the map that went with it, and some other historic documentation, the HOD FAQs that you all put together, and then also the website the link that you gave us that directs you immediately to the HRA site that has your business card on it or your contact information on it, and it also has the link to view these meetings. And I worked with we have a great graphic person in our neighborhood who put together our website and has created a historic overlay tab within the website. And then I think on Sunday night or maybe Monday, I can't remember when it was, posted to the listserv to go check out the historic overlay link, because I think one of the things that's important to do is keep the information in a single source. Otherwise, you're chasing all the different places where you've put it. And when I posted it to the listserv, I did say that we're meeting this Wednesday, and if anybody had any questions, to reach out. I actually think I might have listed everybody in the work group. If I didn't, it was just because I was doing it at midnight or 1 or something, and I just couldn't grab the emails. But so the information is out there. I think it's just like ZMod, like a lot of these things, you know, we're all just really busy, and when people look at this and go, HOD, when somebody screams, I'll pay attention, you know, and until then I kind of won't. So hopefully having it on our really beautiful website and a place where maybe we update, you know, maybe what I could do is grab the agenda out of the web link and post it as a PDF, or I don't really know, but what we really we need a Xerox machine for me, because I'm running out, I gotta say.
Yeah, I was gonna say, why don't you, if there are things that will make it easier for you guys to have that information for your website, let me know, because I mean I can PDF stuff very easily, but let me come up with a list of things that I think might help, and I'll get back to you guys in the next week to make sure that we are, because I think part of it too is that COVID, that first part kind of probably stalled everything, because, you know, we were charging ahead like November 2019, and we were starting, the board motion was in January, and then everything stopped. And so I think that probably added that kind of dead time into it. And so we'll, I'll go back and I'll come up with a list of things to hopefully make sure that we're directly reaching out and pushing it into the neighborhood. And so that way it's not, like you said, people aren't going to go to the website as often as we would hope that they would. And so we'll make sure that we're putting it in their laps as much as we can. I think
in the perfect world, if one of us in our group, you know, would say, okay, look, every Monday I'm going to post X, and it'll be the agenda. It'll be, you know, did you know, 2 FAQs, and it'll be, you know, and the agenda for the upcoming meeting, and, you know, and maybe all of our emails. If that were just where people knew, okay, every Monday I'm going to get this push on the listserv, and it's going to give me a little update, I think that would be great. But that's management, and I can't put another thing on my plate right now. So I think that's partly, and that is my frustration right now, is I'm trying to find, which is why I kind of in the 11th hour pulled together stuff for the website. I'm trying to find a way to get that information out. And I do think, I wonder
I'll have to check with my county folks to make sure that it's something that I can do. But if it's something, I don't know if I'm allowed to post on the listserv, if that, like when I send you guys the agenda, usually 2 weeks before, if I can post it on the listserv to take that, you know, if that makes it easier. I don't know if I'm allowed to.
That's easy enough for me to do. You send me the email, okay. That's not a problem, but I'm saying even just to try to get, well, no, I mean, I would love it if it came as a PDF. That would save me one step. The download. But I'm just saying that if the neighborhood knew that once a week, either the website was getting updated and I could push people to that, or that we were posting something on the listserv and I could push people to that. But it would be helpful to already have people start thinking about, I don't know, and this is what I was going to ask you, if there are any, maybe not articles, but like if there are pushbacks and questions that are coming out of the Holland Hills guidelines, can those be turned into, did you know? When we say match the character, we're not saying pick a manufacturer. We're saying blah, blah, blah. You know, did you know? We talk about, you know, maintaining the character of the roof. We're not talking about the material. We're talking about pitch, overhang, whatever. Just super easy, quick. That might obviate some of the concern and misinformation when we finally roll out the guidelines.
Well, and what I was thinking about was, when we were talking, was updating the FAQs. And so maybe that's what I can do every couple weeks if we get, because even some of the stuff that we have the conversations here, I think would be helpful.
Yeah.
And I've also had heroes,
right?
I've also started making meetings. The chats are really long, and like you said, they're hard to scroll through, and not everybody wants to watch the whole meeting. So we're starting to have the meeting summaries up there too, so that way it is easier. But I can probably put all that in a PDF to send to you after the meeting when I process it all. And if you want to push that out to the broader community, and we could put, yeah, any new FAQs maybe at the bottom of that every time.
I mean, I think that would be helpful, because I think really what, to speak to Jenny's comment, I think it's the absence. And that's what I put in my listserv post, boy, vacuums are always filled. So if you don't put information out there, somebody thinks you're doing something nefarious, and it's just really hard to climb out of that,
I mean, I think we're, seeing that in the Holland Hills, it's been a long process. And so even though it feels like we've been engaging in the entire time, people are not always they don't have the time to pay attention to every single detail. And so,
but it'd be great. I mean, if it looked like if it were, like I said, once a week, and it was agenda and 3 FAQs, or agenda minutes and 3 FAQs, or just something that's just a constant drip, but not a huge tome of information. I mean, I really tried to synthesize what I posted on the listserv so it could be immediately germane to what we're doing. I think that's important. I mean, we live in a soundbite world. Nobody's paying attention to, nobody's going to 3 or 4 links. They're going to the first one. They're looking at it. If it's confusing or too much information, they're moving on, unfortunately. But that's kind of...
No, I think it's true. And probably also just being inundated with being on the computer right now for everybody. So
really true. Really true.
It is, right? Like at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't really want to look at my computer anymore. So
100% right.
Okay, so I will work on that in the next few days and start come back to you guys with kind of the idea of how else we can push out information to make sure that the community is getting the same thing that you guys are getting, condensed form, and that we're hopefully cutting back the misinformation, which I think will be huge as we go through the process.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, at that, we didn't get to the other stuff, but if everybody is okay with having a meeting in February, Lily, are you going to raise your hand?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the chat. I may have addressed this question about the height from Sue. So I misspoke earlier. This is not R2, this is R3. I was thinking of Holland Hills, I guess, but the height limit is the same, 35 feet for single family dwellings, detached single family dwellings. And then for all other uses, it's 60 feet. So what we are, for example, considering is limiting the height to 35 feet for all types of structures, whatever is permitted. So that's something we can consider for this HOD as well. But the height limit for single family detached structures is 35 feet. Just wanted to address that.
Thank you, Lily.
What would fall under that? Like a cell tower or something? Or what could possibly be allowed that would be 60 feet?
So it specifically says single family dwelling, right? When you look at the uses that are permitted by right, for example, and this is a predominantly residential neighborhoods, there is no space for new non-residential uses to be proposed here. But if, for example, something that is non-residential, not a single family residence detached, is proposed with a special permit or a special exception, it could potentially go up to 60 feet. So what we're thinking in Holland Hills, and that has not been baked yet, but it's just a consideration, we could, limit everything to be 35 feet, whether it's by right or with a special permit. There are other by right uses like a public use, county-owned property or park authority property could go in there and potentially could go up to 60 feet.
That'd be great.
Okay.
So Woodburn Elementary, the pool would be the obvious applicants.
And Luria Park, if anybody were to say we want to take that over, because that was a dump that neighbors put together as a park, and it's been assumed as a park, but that's not. I don't know if that's a given that's in perpetuity going to be a park.
The bigger threat is if the pool ever went under and got sold to a developer. There's where you really have your biggest threat.
And we're going to talk. We're going to talk a little bit about boundaries next week, because we need to start talking about that kind of stuff. So parks, just the pool, and then also executive that southern end of Executive Drive, which we kind of talked about a little bit, and whether or not that is, since they're not Homes Run Acres houses, but is there reasons to keep it in as non-contributing? And so that's a conversation we're going to start talking about next month. So with that, so if we continue down with the third week of the month, that would be February 24th. That works for everybody, as much as you can say right now. So if everyone's write that down, and then I'll send you guys an email confirming that over the next couple of days. Just put it on your calendar.
Be meeting at 6:30, Nicole, or pushing it out to a little later?
Just planning on 6:30 unless there's a consensus to start it later.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you guys again for great conversations. I think we've got a lot, hopefully some of the ZMOD, I know that there's still a lot of concern, but just make sure to head to that website and then, you know, take your time to, if you have time tomorrow night, Planning Commission, and then also the Board of Supervisors in March. Because again, those are the folks that are going to be the decision makers and making the recommendations for or against. And so they'll definitely want to hear the concerns and questions that you all have. And then also design guidelines. Thank you, Sarah and Catherine, for hanging on. And we obviously will look forward to working with you over the next so many months.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you all. Thanks.
One
Right.
last thing I wanted to add was
Yes,
the
yes.
Planning Commission. There's a speaker list that you can fill up ahead of time if you plan to speak tomorrow. Go ahead and check out the Planning Commission's website tonight or tomorrow early so you can sign up to speak at the public hearing.
Thank you, Lily. All right. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it. And you'll be hearing from me.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
All right. You're welcome. Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.